I smiled sweetly across the mediation table at my soon-to-be ex-husband, and I watched his eyes narrow with suspicion. "You can have the house," I said. Marcus went very still. His lawyer, Patricia Chen, a shark in Louboutins who'd been circling me for the past 2 hours, actually stopped mid-sentence. Even my own attorney, kind Mr. Harrison, who'd been family friends with my parents for decades, turned to stare at me. "I'm sorry," Marcus said carefully. "You want to repeat that?" "The house. You can have it. I don't want to fight anymore." I let my voice crack just slightly right at the end, just enough to sound broken, beaten. The house was worth $2.3 million. We'd bought it 3 years ago, right after my father died, and left me a substantial inheritance. So Marcus had insisted on this specific property. A stunning craftsman in the old money part of the town, with original hardwood floors and a wraparound porch. He'd said it was an investment. He'd said we'd grow old there. He'd said a lot of things. "Meredith," Mr. Harrison said gently, touching my arm, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No." I shook my head, letting a single tear roll down my cheek. I'd practiced this in the mirror last night, making sure I could cry on command. "I'm tired, Mr. Harrison. I just want this to be over." Marcus's hand crept across the table toward mine, and I let him take it. His skin felt cold. It had always been cold, I realized, even when I'd convinced myself it was warm. "Mur," he said, using the nickname that used to make me melt, and now made my stomach turn. "You don't have to do this. Oh, we can work something out. Split everything fairly." I almost laughed. Instead, I squeezed his hand and gave him my most tremulous smile. "I know you love that house," I whispered, "more than you ever loved me." His jaw tightened. Patricia shifted in her seat, sensing weakness like blood in the water. "My client is willing to accept Mrs. Chen's generous offer," she said quickly. Too quickly. "In exchange, we'll waive spousal support and split the remaining assets 50-50. "Wait," Marcus started, but Patricia shot him a look that could have melted steel. Mr. Harrison was shaking his head. "Meredith, that house was purchased primarily with your inheritance. You're entitled to at least 70% of its value. This is financial suicide." "I don't care about the money," I said, and this time I meant it. And because money, even $2.3 million, was nothing compared to what I was about to take from Marcus Chen. I was about to take everything. The thing is, this wasn't my first time sitting at this table. 3 months ago, I died. It wasn't dramatic, no car crash, no terminal illness, no murder. I simply went to sleep one night in my cramped studio apartment, the cheapest place I could find after Marcus cleaned me out in our divorce, and I didn't wake up. The coroner said it was a heart attack, stress-induced. I was 34 years old, but before I died, I'd spent 5 years watching Marcus live in that beautiful house with his new wife. His new wife, who used to be my best friend. His new wife, who had been sleeping with him for 2 years before our marriage fell apart. His new wife, Stephanie fucking Rodriguez, who'd held my hand through my mother's funeral, who'd been my maid of honor, who'd told me she loved me like a sister while she was fucking my husband in our bed. In my first life, I'd fought for that house. I'd fought hard. Marcus's lawyer had buried me in motions and continuances, dragging the divorce out for 18 months while legal fees devoured my inheritance. By the time we finally settled, I'd been so exhausted, so broken, that I'd accepted a pittance just to make it stop. $50,000. That's what I'd walked away with from a $2.3 million asset. Marcus had proposed to Stephanie 3 weeks after our divorce was finalized. They'd married in our backyard, under the trellis I'd planted roses on. I knew because Stephanie posted the pictures on Instagram, tagged #blessed beyond measure. I'd spent the next 5 years barely surviving, working 2 jobs, living in places with roaches and black mold, watching from a distance as Marcus's tech startup, the one he'd built using my father's connections, the ones I'd introduced him to, went public and made him a multimillionaire. And then I died alone with $847 in my bank account and a maxed out credit card. I died thinking about that house. But then I woke up. I woke up in my old bedroom, in my childhood home, 3 days after my father's funeral. The funeral where Marcus had held me while I sobbed, had promised me he'd take care of everything, had suggested we use my inheritance to buy a house together, something solid, something permanent, something he could steal. The first thing I did was throw up. The second thing I did was laugh until I cried. The third thing I did was check the date on my phone. June 15th, 2019. 3.5 years before my death. 6 months before I discover the affair. 1 month before we'd close on the house. I had time, not much, but enough. Enough to make sure that this time, Marcus Chen would get exactly what he deserved. "Are you sure about this, sweetheart?" Mr. Harrison asked again as we left the mediation office. I nodded, clutching the folder with our preliminary settlement agreement. "I'm sure. Your father would want me to fight harder for you. My father would want me to be happy," I said. And that was true. Dad would have hated seeing me like I'd been in my first life. Hollowed out, broken, barely surviving. "And this will make me happy?" Mr. Harrison sighed. "You're too kind, Meredith. Too forgiving." "That man cheated on you with your best friend." "I know. I'd caught them 2 weeks ago, earlier than in my first life. I'd come home from work early, claiming a migraine, and found them in our bedroom. Stephanie had been wearing my robe. The betrayal should have destroyed me, but I'd been expecting it. I'd even smiled before I started screaming. The look on their faces had been worth everything. "At least you're free of him now," Mr. Harrison said, patting my shoulder. "That's worth more than any house." I smiled. "Yes, it is." What Mr. Harrison didn't know, what nobody knew except me, was that in exactly 14 months, a massive sinkhole would open up 3 blocks from our house. Well, Marcus's house now. The sinkhole would be caused by an underground creek that developers had built over in the 1920s. They're routing it through a series of deteriorating concrete pipes that the city had forgotten existed. When the pipes finally collapsed under the weight of a century of neglect, they'd take half the neighborhood with them. The houses closest to the sinkhole would be condemned immediately. The ones in the impact zone, including 2447 Rosewood Avenue, the beautiful craftsman with original hardwood floors, would be flagged for foundation inspections. Those inspections would reveal catastrophic structural damage, cracks in the foundation, shifting walls, a house that looked perfect on the surface but was rotting from the bottom up. I knew because I'd watched it happen in my first life. I'd watched from my studio apartment, eating ramen for the 4th night in a row as the local news covered the story. I'd seen Marcus interviewed on TV, looking devastated as he explained that his insurance wouldn't cover pre-existing geological conditions. I'd seen the house condemned. I'd seen it torn down. I'd seen Marcus lose every penny of the $2.3 million he'd stolen from me, and I'd felt nothing, because by then, I'd been too broken to feel anything at all. But this time, I was going to enjoy every single second. The paperwork took 3 weeks to finalize. 3 weeks of Marcus trying to convince me to change my mind, suddenly playing the role of concerned husband who didn't want me to make a mistake. "Keep the house, Mare," he'd say. "I'll move in with Stephanie. You deserve it after everything I put you through." The audacity of it made me want to scream. But I played my part perfectly. Broken, exhausted Meredith, who just wanted it to be over. "I can't stay there, Marcus," I'd say, my voice small and wounded. "There are too many memories. Every room reminds me of what we had, what I thought we had. Then we'll sell it and split the money." "No, you love that house. I know you do. Consider it my parting gift." He'd protest, weakly, but I could see the greed in his eyes. Could see him calculating the value, imagining himself and Stephanie playing house in my dream home. Let him imagine. Meanwhile, I was busy, so busy. The first thing I did was liquidate every asset I could get my hands on without raising suspicion. My mother's jewelry, which I'd been planning to keep forever in my first life. My father's vintage car collection, which I'd sold for pennies on the dollar because I'd needed the money fast. My own retirement accounts. Taking the penalty because I knew I'd make it back and more. By the time the divorce was finalized, I'd moved nearly $400,000 into accounts Marcus knew nothing about. Offshore accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, investment portfolios under my mother's maiden name, money that couldn't be touched in the settlement because it technically didn't exist. The second thing I did was reach out to my father's old business contacts, the ones Marcus had been courting for his startup. In my first life, I'd introduced them reluctantly, wanting to support my husband's dreams. This time, I took them to lunch myself and explained that Marcus and I were divorcing, and I wanted to make sure they knew he'd been cheating on me throughout our marriage. I didn't ask them not to invest in his company. I didn't have to. And these were old school businessmen who valued loyalty and family. The kind who wouldn't touch Marcus Chen with a 10-foot pole once they knew what he'd done. Without their investment, Marcus's startup would never go public. It would limp along for a few years, maybe, before dying quietly like the thousands of other tech companies that never found their footing. But the house was the centerpiece. My masterpiece. The divorce was finalized on August 3rd. Marcus got the house, the Audi he'd bought with my money, and half of our remaining assets. I got my freedom, my hidden fortune, and the satisfaction of knowing exactly what was coming. I moved into a gorgeous loft downtown, the kind of place I'd never been able to afford in my first life. Floor-to-ceiling windows, exposed brick, a view of the city skyline. I furnished it carefully, turning it into a sanctuary, my sanctuary. Stephanie moved into the house the same week. She posted about it on Instagram, of course. Pictures of her and Marcus on the porch swing, sipping wine and looking blissfully happy. The caption read, "New chapter, new beginnings. So grateful for this beautiful home and the love of my life. #second chances, #true love." I liked the post. Let them think I was being mature about it. Supportive, even. I was counting down. 14 months felt like an eternity at first, but I filled it well. I started my own business, a consulting firm helping women protect their assets during divorce. I knew every trick, every loophole, every way a vengeful spouse could hide money or drag out proceedings. I'd lived through it after all. The business took off faster than I'd expected. Turns out there were a lot of women in my position, married to men who thought they were smarter, more deserving, more entitled to the fruits of their wives' labor. I helped them. Every single one of them. And I thought about Marcus and Stephanie, playing house in my beautiful Craftsman, completely unaware of the ticking time bomb beneath their feet. I drove past the house sometimes. Not often. I didn't want to seem obsessed. But once every few weeks, I'd take the long way home from a client meeting and slow down as I passed 2447 Rosewood Avenue. The garden looked good. Stephanie had added solar lights along the walkway. They'd repainted the front door, a cheerful yellow instead of the sage green I'd chosen. It hurt seeing my dream home turned into theirs. But I held on to the hurt, let it fuel me. 14 months, 13 months, 12 months. I dated. Nothing serious, but enough to remind myself that I was still young, still desirable, still worthy of love. Men who didn't lie, who didn't cheat, who saw me as a partner, not a bank account. I made new friends, real friends, who didn't smile to my face while sleeping with my husband behind my back. I rebuilt myself into someone stronger, someone harder, someone who would never again be the naive girl who trusted too easily. And I waited. 10 months, 8 months, 6 months. Marcus's startup was struggling. I heard through the grapevine, my father's old contacts who'd stayed loyal to me, that they were burning through their initial investment faster than expected. They'd tried to court some of the bigger venture capital firms, but without the connections I'd provided in my first life, they couldn't get meetings. Marcus had reached out once, about 7 months after the divorce, a friendly text asking how I was doing, casual, like we were old friends. I knew what he really wanted. He wanted me to introduce him to the investors, to save his sinking ship. I replied with a smiley face emoji and nothing else. 4 months, 3 months, 2 months. Stephanie was pregnant. She announced it on Instagram with a professional photo shoot. Her and Marcus on the porch, her hand on her barely there bump, both of them glowing with joy. The caption, "Our family is growing. Baby Chen coming spring 2021. This house is going to be filled with so much love. #blessed, #baby on the way, #dreams do come true." I stared at that post for a long time. In my first life, I'd seen it and wanted to die. Had actually wished I was dead rather than see them so happy while I was so miserable. This time, I smiled. Spring 2021, that meant the baby would be about 3 months old when the sinkhole opened up. When their perfect life came crashing down, I felt a moment of guilt. Not for Marcus or Stephanie, but for the baby who hadn't asked for any of this. But I pushed it aside. The child would be fine. Marcus had family money. Even if his startup was failing, they'd land on their feet. They just wouldn't land in my house. 1 month, 3 weeks, 2 weeks. I stopped sleeping well, not from anxiety, from anticipation. I'd set 3 different Google alerts for news about sinkholes, geological surveys, infrastructure failures in my neighborhood. In my first life, the sinkhole had opened on October 17th during a particularly heavy rainstorm. The weather forecast showed rain for the entire week of October 15th. It was happening. It was really happening. I took the week off work, told my assistant I needed some personal time. I wasn't going to miss this. October 15th arrived with dark clouds and a steady drizzle. I made myself breakfast, a real breakfast, with pancakes and fresh fruit and the expensive coffee I'd taught myself to love, and settled onto my couch with my laptop. Nothing happened. October 16th, more rain. Heavier now. I refreshed the local news website every 15 minutes, checked my phone obsessively, drove past the house twice, slowly, looking for any signs of distress. Still nothing? October 17th. The rain was torrential now, the kind that flooded streets and knocked out power. I sat in my loft with candles ready, my laptop fully charged, my phone in my hand. At 2:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. Breaking: major sinkhole opens in Rosewood District. My hand shook as I opened the article. There was a photo, a massive crater in the middle of Sycamore Street, 3 blocks from the house. Emergency vehicles surrounded it. The article said it was at least 40 feet deep and growing. I read every word. Then I read it again. Then I opened a bottle of champagne I'd been saving for this exact moment and poured myself a glass. To karma, I said out loud, raising the glass to my empty loft, and to geological surveys from the 1920s. The news coverage was constant over the next few days. The sinkhole was a disaster. It had swallowed 2 cars and part of a house. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured, but the entire neighborhood was evacuated while engineers assessed the damage. I watched Marcus on the news. He's standing outside a Red Cross shelter with Stephanie, looking shell-shocked. The reporter asked him about his house. "We don't know yet," he said, his voice tight. "They're saying the whole area might be unstable. Underground creek system from the 20s that nobody knew about. They have to inspect every foundation within a 6-block radius." The reporter nodded sympathetically. That must be terrifying, especially with a baby on the way. "We'll be fine," Marcus said. But he didn't look fine. He looked like a man watching his world collapse in real time. "The house is insured. We'll figure it out." Oh, Marcus. Sweet, stupid, greedy Marcus. Insurance doesn't cover pre-existing geological conditions. The inspections took 2 weeks. I followed every update, every news story, every social media post from neighbors in the area. See, Stephanie had gone quiet online. No more hash-blessed posts about their beautiful home. The city released the inspection results on November 3rd. Of the 42 homes in the impact zone, 17 were condemned immediately. Catastrophic foundation damage, unsafe to occupy. 2447 Rosewood Avenue was number 6 on the list. I read the report online. It was technical, full of engineering jargon about load-bearing walls and soil displacement and structural integrity. But the summary was clear. The house's foundation had multiple stress fractures. The underground creek had been slowly eroding the soil beneath it for decades. The recent sinkhole had accelerated the damage. The house was, in the opinion of 3 separate structural engineers, a total loss. The estimated cost to repair the foundation, if repair was even possible, was $800,000. And the house was worth $2.3 million. Or it had been before the words condemned and geological hazard zone tanked property values in the entire neighborhood. I opened another bottle of champagne. Marcus tried calling me that night. I let it go to voicemail. He called again the next morning. And the morning after that. Finally, I answered. "Meredith." His voice was ragged, desperate. "Have you seen the news?" "I have. I'm so sorry, Marcus. That's terrible." "The house is condemned. They're saying the foundation is fucked, that it's been unstable for years." "Oh no, but you have insurance, right?" There was a long pause. "Insurance doesn't cover this. It's considered a pre-existing condition. Something about geological surveys and disclosure requirements and fuck, Mer. I don't even understand half of what the lawyers are saying." "That's awful. Have you talked to a structural engineer about repairs?" $800,000 minimum. And that's if they can even fix it. Which they probably can't. The whole fucking foundation needs to be replaced. I made a sympathetic noise. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Stephanie's losing her mind. She wanted to raise our daughter in that house. We've put so much work into it. So much money into renovations and furniture and..." His voice broke. Actually, broke. "It's all gone, Mare. Everything." "I'm sorry. I said, and I was. Sorry that he'd ever been born. Sorry that I'd wasted 6 years of my life on him. Sorry that Stephanie was pregnant with his child. But mostly, I was sorry it had taken me dying and being reborn to find my spine. The worst part is, if I'd known, if there'd been any way to know about the foundation issues before we bought it, I never would have wanted the house in the divorce. I would have pushed for a sale and split. You could have had half of $2.3 million instead of... He trailed off. Instead of nothing, I finished gently. Fuck. I'm such an idiot. You didn't know, Marcus. Nobody knew. It was just bad luck. Yeah. He laughed bitterly. Bad luck. Story of my fucking life lately. The startup's failing, the house is condemned, Stephanie's about to have a baby, and we're living in her mom's basement. How did everything go so wrong? I thought about explaining it to him, thought about telling him that everything went wrong the moment he decided to betray me, to use me, to throw me away like garbage. Thought about explaining karma and consequences, and the beautiful poetry of watching him lose everything I'd lost in my first life. Instead, I said, I hope things get better for you, Marcus. I really do. I didn't mean it, of course, but it felt good to say. He called a few more times over the next few weeks, always with updates about the house situation. The city had officially condemned it. They had 30 days to vacate, which was moot since they'd already moved out during the evacuation. He'd talked to a lawyer about suing the previous owners for non-disclosure, but apparently, the previous owners hadn't known about the foundation issues either. The geological survey that would have revealed the underground creek had been filed in 1924 and lost in a city hall fire in 1973. Nobody had known. Nobody except me. By December, Marcus had listed the house for sale. As is, condemned property, foundation damage, buyer responsible for all repairs or demolition. The listing price was $200,000, basically the value of the land. And even that was optimistic given the geological hazard designation. There were no offers, not one. Meanwhile, my business was thriving. I'd hired 2 associates and was turning away clients. I'd been interviewed by Forbes about protecting assets during divorce. I'd been asked to speak at a women's conference in the spring. I'd also started dating someone. Someone kind, someone honest, someone who'd never even heard of Marcus Chen, and didn't care about my past beyond wanting to make sure I was healing from it. His name was David, and he made me laugh. Really laugh, the kind that made my stomach hurt and my eyes water. We'd met at a coffee shop when he'd accidentally taken my latte and I'd accidentally taken his cappuccino, and we'd bonded over our mutual caffeination crisis. On our 3rd date, I told him about Marcus. Not everything, not the rebirth, obviously, that was between me and whatever cosmic force had given me this second chance. But I told him about the cheating, the divorce, the house. Wait, David said, his eyes widening. That house on Rosewood Avenue? The one that got condemned? That's the one. Holy shit. I saw that on the news. The foundation was completely fucked, right? Completely. And your ex got stuck with it in the divorce? He insisted on it, actually. I tried to convince him to sell and split the money, but he really wanted the house. David started laughing. Oh my god, that's the best thing I've ever heard. Oh, the universe has a sense of humor. It really does, I agreed, smiling into my wine glass. You must feel so vindicated. I feel free, I said, and it was true. The revenge was sweet. Don't get me wrong, watching Marcus lose everything he'd stolen from me was satisfying in ways I couldn't fully express. But the real victory wasn't his loss. It was my gain. In my first life, that divorce had destroyed me. It had taken everything I was and ground it into dust. I'd spent 5 years barely surviving, barely existing, until my body gave out from the stress. This time, I'd turned it into fuel, into power, into a second chance that I'd use to build something better, something mine, something that couldn't be taken from me. Marcus had taken my house, but I'd taken my life back, and that was worth more than any amount of money. I heard through Mr. Harrison that Marcus had filed for bankruptcy in February. The house still hadn't sold. His startup had officially dissolved. Stephanie had the baby, a daughter, and they were living with her parents, trying to figure out their next move. I sent a baby gift. A thoughtful one, a handmade quilt and a savings bond for the baby's future, because the baby was innocent in all of this, and I wasn't a monster. Stephanie texted me a thank you. It was awkward and brief, but I could read the subtext. She knew I knew about the affair, knew I could have destroyed them publicly, knew I'd chosen not to. I'd chosen to let karma do it for me. The house was finally demolished in May. I drove past it one last time before they tore it down. The beautiful craftsman with its wraparound porch and original hardwood floors. The house I'd dreamed about, planned for, imagined growing old in. It looked sad, condemned, yellow tape and warning signs, broken windows and a sagging roof. The garden was overgrown, the porch swing broken. It looked like something dying. I took a picture. Not for social media. I'd never been the type to gloat publicly. Just for me. A reminder of what I'd survived, what I'd overcome, what I'd won. Then I drove home to my loft, where David was cooking dinner and humming off-key to the radio, and I didn't think about Marcus Chen, or that house, or my first life for the rest of the night. The demolition happened on a Tuesday. I didn't go watch. I didn't need to. I'd already seen everything I needed to see. Instead, I had lunch with a new client, a woman whose husband was hiding assets in cryptocurrency and thought she was too stupid to figure it out. I showed her exactly how to trace the transactions, how to subpoena the exchanges, how to make sure she got every penny she was owed. "How do you know all this?" she asked, amazed. "Experience," I said simply, "and a really good memory." That night, David and I went to dinner at the new Italian place downtown. Over tiramisu, he asked me to move in with him. "I know it's fast," he said, taking my hand, "and I know you've been through a lot. But I love you, Meredith. I love the life we're building together, and I want to build more of it." I thought about my first life, how I'd rushed into marriage with Marcus because I'd been young and in love and stupid, how I'd trusted too easily, given too much, lost everything. I thought about the lessons I'd learned, the hard way and then the harder way, and finally, the right way. "Yes," I said, "but I'm keeping the loft and my separate bank accounts and my independence." David laughed. "I wouldn't want you any other way." We moved in together in July. Not to his place or mine, but to a new place we chose together. A penthouse with a view of the river and enough space for both our lives to coexist without consuming each other. I kept the loft and rented it out, investment property, because I'd learned that you never put all your eggs in one basket, never trust someone else to be your safety net, never give up your escape route. My business expanded. I hired 5 more associates, opened a second office in the next city over, started getting calls from women all over the state who'd heard about the consultant who could outsmart any divorce lawyer, who'd been through it herself and come out stronger. I helped them all, every single one, because I remembered what it felt like to be helpless, to be trapped, to watch someone take everything you'd built and claim it as their own. I made sure they never felt that way again. Marcus reached out one more time, almost 2 years after the divorce. It was my birthday, my 34th birthday, the age I'd been when I died in my first life. I was celebrating with David and friends at a rooftop bar, champagne and laughter and a future so bright it almost hurt to look at. My phone buzzed with a message. "Marcus, happy birthday, Mare. I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. About us. About the choices we made. I wish things had ended differently. I wish I'd been a better husband. You deserved better. You always did." I stared at the message for a long time. David noticed. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, deleting the message without responding. "Everything's perfect." And it was. Because here's the thing about revenge. The best kind isn't about destruction. It's about reconstruction. It's about taking everything someone tried to take from you and building it into something they could never touch, never diminish, never steal. Marcus had taken my house, but I'd built an empire. He'd taken my trust, but I'd learned discernment. He'd taken my first life, but I'd made my second one extraordinary. That condemned house on Rosewood Avenue, the one with the cracked foundation and the broken dreams. It was finally sold in the fall. A developer bought it for $75,000, just the land value, and built a parking lot. I heard Marcus made about $30,000 after paying off the remaining mortgage and the various liens that had accumulated during the bankruptcy. $30,000 from a $2.3 million asset, the same way I'd walked away with $50,000 in my first life. The symmetry was beautiful, but I'd long since stopped caring about Marcus's losses. They were just background noise to my victories. And my victories, they were loud enough to drown out anything else. I married David on a beach in Mexico, surrounded by friends I'd made in this second life. Real friends, loyal friends, people who saw me for who I was and loved me anyway. My business hit 7 figures in annual revenue. I started a nonprofit helping low-income women access legal resources during divorce. I bought my dream house, a beautiful Victorian with a garden and a reading nook and a foundation that had been inspected 3 times by 3 different engineers. I learned to trust again, but carefully. To love again, but wisely. To give again, but not everything. Never everything. And every time I drove past that parking lot on Rosewood Avenue, I smiled. Not because Marcus had lost everything, but because I'd won everything. The universe had given me something impossible. A second chance, a do-over, a reset button on the worst mistake of my life. And I'd used it perfectly. Not to destroy Marcus. That would have been too easy, too quick, too hollow. The sinkhole would have happened whether I manipulated him into keeping the house or not. The geological instability was real, the infrastructure failure inevitable. I'd simply made sure that when it happened, he'd be the one caught in the rubble. The way I'd been caught in my first life. The way I died, broken, poor, alone, while he lived in luxury built on my father's money and my stupid, naive love. This time, I was the one in the penthouse. I was the one with the thriving business and the honest partner and the future so bright I had to wear shades. And Marcus was the one learning what it felt like to lose everything. Marcus was the one starting over with nothing. Marcus was the one who'd had a house with a cracked foundation, literal and metaphorical, and watched it crumble into dust. I never told him the truth, never revealed that I'd known, that I'd planned it. That every choice he'd made during our divorce had been carefully orchestrated by the woman he'd underestimated. I didn't need to. The best revenge isn't making someone know you've won. It's winning so completely that their knowledge or ignorance becomes irrelevant. It's building a life so beautiful that they become a footnote in your story instead of the main character in your tragedy. It's taking the worst thing that ever happened to you and turning it into the best thing that ever happened to you. That's what I did. And as I stood on my balcony on the anniversary of my death, the death that never happened this time, would never happen, I raised a glass to the woman I'd been. The woman who'd suffered. The woman who'd died. The woman who'd been given an impossible gift and used it to rewrite her entire existence. Thank you, I whispered to the universe, to fate, to whatever cosmic force had sent me back. Thank you for the second chance. I didn't waste it. The city sparkled below me, full of lights and life and possibility. Somewhere out there, Marcus Chen was probably lying awake, wondering where it all went wrong. And I was home, in a house with a solid foundation, with a man who loved me honestly, with a life I'd built brick by brick, choice by choice, victory by victory. The house on Rosewood Avenue was gone, but I was finally free. And that was the ending I deserved. Not the one I got the first time, but the one I fought for, planned for, waited 14 months for. The one where the girl who lost everything learned to take it all back. The one where the condemned house stayed condemned. And the condemned life got a second chance. I lived it every single day, and it was perfect.